Welcome back to Medical Monday. I'm Carrie Sharp here, joined by Dr. David Gnewikow with Advanced Hearing Solutions. This show is all about helping you hear better and answering any questions that's involved with that. Go ahead and give us a call. 615-737-PLUS is the number. We would be happy to answer your questions tonight. I say we. He would be happy to answer your questions tonight. Let's talk about the science behind hearing loss.
Okay.
How does it happen?
Okay, so first let's talk about causes of hearing loss. So I think a lot of times hearing loss kind of has this stigma, I'm going to use that word, that, oh, that's just a problem for old people. And Mark, I think, called a minute ago and talked about his 94-year-old aunt. And certainly hearing loss is something that does tend to creep more on us as we age, as do other things like vision loss and muscle loss. Lots of stuff happens to us as we age. But hearing loss is not strictly an aging problem. Hearing loss can be caused by damage to the inner ear. I'll talk about that in a second. From noise. So people who have worked around loud noise, people who have loud hobbies, that can cause hearing loss. Genetics is the biggest one. So I keep going back to Mark calling earlier. He said, my mom had hearing loss, her sister had hearing loss, her other sister had hearing loss. That's a genetic problem. And so a lot of times genetics overrides everything else, just like it does with lots of other stuff. You can exercise and be super healthy, but heart disease runs in the family and you have some risk factors for that. Just like hearing loss, I can do everything I can to protect my hearing from loud sounds and all of that, but genetics can catch up with us a little bit. Physically, what happens in most types of hearing loss that we see is there is a deterioration of the function in the inner ear of some cells that are called hair cells. So I will give you guys a very quick explanation of how hearing works. Sound waves travel down the ear canal and hit the eardrum. The eardrum is just like what it sounds like. It's like the head of a drum. So sound pressure waves cause that eardrum to move. There are some little bones on the back side of the eardrum called the malleus, incus, and stapes, or the hammer, anvil, and stirrup is what you learned in school. Those little bones will vibrate. And the stapes, the last bone in that chain, is a piston that moves a fluid in the inner ear. And inside the inner ear sit thousands of what are called hair cells. They're these little cells with hairs on top of them that as that piston moves, it causes the fluid to move. Those hairs will deflect. That creates an electrical charge inside the cell, fires the nerve, goes to the brainstem in your brain. That's how you hear. 7 years at Vanderbilt for that. I hope all of you people appreciate that. Now, my point, I don't have to explain that to every one of our patients, but the problem with hearing loss usually comes from those little hair cells that I was describing. And again, genetics can just naturally cause them to die. That can be due to changes in blood flow, changes in body chemistry. Noise can damage them, so excessive exposure to noise can eventually, it's called metabolic exhaustion. It can eventually just destroy that cell. A sound that is loud enough can actually destroy it instantly, like a really loud gunshot or an explosion or something like that. But most people with what we call sensory neural hearing loss, which is what I'm describing, it is a loss of those nerve hair cell function in the inner ear. Then you have to have a louder sound in order to stimulate, because some of those cells aren't there anymore. How's that for a very quick explanation?
It's very good. Now, we have still had people call in and say, isn't there some type of surgery? How can we regenerate those nerves?
Correct.
What can you do? But there's just not right now.
Well, there's lots and lots of research right now, and for the last 15 years, going on what's called hair cell regeneration. So the only way to truly restore hearing when it's a sensory neural problem is in some way causing either those cells to regrow or nerve endings to kind of rewire themselves in order to work. And there's research in animals, and there's research in, I'm forgetting the term, stem cell. Sorry, it took me a second to come up with that. They're like, how can we inject something into the inner ear to make it regrow? And there have been a few successes, but those successes have usually been in a laboratory under very controlled conditions. There have not been successes in human subjects where that human got whatever treatment and they tested them 2 weeks later, 2 months later, 2 years later, and there was regrowth of those cells and improved hearing. This is my opinion. This is not from any scientific journal. It's just from understanding the science of it and understanding how that science has progressed. I feel like in my lifetime, Lord willing, I'm around for another 40 years or so, I think we will see some type of treatments that will either slow or prevent progression of hearing loss. I don't know that we're going to see something that is going to reverse it completely. Or I can go in at age 60 having lost 30% of my hearing, have a procedure done, and that be restored. And I'll make one more comment on this. I have patients ask me this all the time. Well, you know, there's eye surgery.
Right.
You know, you can go get LASIK surgery and have your vision back, and they can replace a heart, for goodness sakes. Why can they not fix hearing? And it's because it is all nerves, and it is replacing thousands of microscopic cells that are all connected, and it's not just one little module. It goes to the brainstem, goes to the brain, the wires come back. It is a very complex process. And when we fix LASIK surgery, all the nerves are still working. When we fix vision with LASIK surgery, all the nerves are still working. My optic nerve is still working. We're just kind of changing the shape of the eyeball to get that sound. My eye doctor friends don't like me saying eyeball. Sorry about that. That was very bad. But we're just changing how that light refracts. It is much more complicated when it comes to hearing.
Okay, we're going to jump off and I'm going to say, well, how do hearing aids work in just a second? But first, I want to go to Sandra. Sandra's waiting ever so patiently for us. Sandra, what's your question tonight?
My question was, do you deal with ringing in the ears? My husband has a lot of that, and I don't know. It's just come on just lately.
Sandra, I'm going to have Dr. David Gnewikow answer that, but I'm going to hang up so you can listen to your TV now, okay?
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. That's a great question. I've come on this show for a year or so. We get that question quite regularly, and the reason is it's annoying to people. So the ringing in the ears is called tinnitus or tinnitus, depending on how you read it and who your professor was in college. Ringing in the ears is a sign of damage to those hair cells we were just talking about. So Sandra, if you listen through my long spiel of explaining all this stuff to Carrie, when there is damage to the inner ear, usually there are signals happening that are not supposed to be happening. And for lack of a better scientific explanation, it's almost like a shorted out circuit. My job as this little hair cell sitting in the inner ear is to wait until they hit my frequency. It's tuned like a piano keyboard. So when a sound hits my frequency, I fire the nerve and that sound goes to the brainstem in my brain. But what if it's broken? What if there's a short in that circuit? What happens is we hear a constant signal, and depending on where those cells are that are damaged, it could be high frequency or low frequency. For most people, it's higher frequency. It sounds like crickets. Ooh, it sounds like kind of a tone going on all the time. Unfortunately, Sandra, I can't give you a perfect answer to say, aha, this is the solution. All he needs to do is X, because there's not truly a cure for tinnitus. Usually, like I said, it's a sign of damage in the inner ear, which is permanent, and most people that experience it end up having it continuously. Now, hearing aids are the most effective treatment for tinnitus. And people look at me like I'm crazy when I say that. Why would turning up sound make a sound go away? Well, it's pretty simple in that most people who have tinnitus have some hearing loss in that range. So when I take away their ability to hear environmental sounds, as I sit in this room, I can hear, you know, the air rustling, and I can hear myself move in the chair. So I'm picking up environmental sounds. When I have hearing loss, I'm not picking up those things. So the primary signal for me is that ringing going on. So that's a good treatment. Sort of an at-home remedy is anything that you can do in your environment to create a little bit of noise tends to be helpful. So a lot of our patients will buy a noisemaker or even turn on a box fan when they're sleeping, just to give a little bit of noise to kind of cover that up. I'll say two more things on this. If his problem happens suddenly, like he just woke up one morning with it, it's probably worth looking into, just to make sure that there's nothing else going on. There's not something that could be medically treated. Sometimes ear infections or fluid in the ears might cause that to be more noticeable, and there might be something that can be treated. And lastly, there are things that we do, mainly that we put into our bodies, that can make those symptoms worse. Stress. I hate to talk about that one because I got that one sometimes. Okay, medications. Lots of medications have ringing in the ears as a side effect. So I would say to him, if he changed medications, it's worth looking at. Are there side effects to that? Maybe talking to his doctor if that's the case. Simple things like ibuprofen and aspirin can cause tinnitus to be worse. Caffeine can, nicotine, alcohol. I just named everybody's favorite things, all of them, okay? But a lot of those things can mess with our body chemistry and can cause that tinnitus to be a little bit worse. So as I preach this to my patients in the clinic, I say, I'm probably not going to make it go away, but you know, if we can help you hear better, that will sort of kill two birds with one stone and help with the ringing most of the time. And also kind of looking at our diet and what we're putting in our bodies. If there are certain days that are really bad, oh yeah, I took a couple of ibuprofen this morning and that made it worse. So kind of paying attention to those things may help also.
And you've said before, just as you've alluded to, that sometimes people will notice it most at night when everything kind of calms down and gets quiet, and that's when it's like, oh wow, we've got a problem here.
Absolutely. It's most noticeable when there's not something else to cover it up. I'll say one more thing to Sandra. It tends to get better. So I saw a guy last week that was so frustrated with the fact that he had started experiencing tinnitus about a month ago. And it was a result of a surgical procedure. I mean, something that really did happen pretty instantly. He's like, you just don't know what it's like to live with this. And I said, actually, I do. So I've had it my whole adult life since I was 20, nonstop, every second of every day. I have a constant ringing that goes on, and I can remember mine started from a gunshot that was close to me that did some damage to my hearing, and I can remember instantly going, I'm never ever going to get used to this because it is so annoying. And here I sit 20-something years later, and I got it, and I don't really pay it a whole lot of attention, and it's not as bothersome. But it took me understanding it and realizing, okay, this is going to just be part of things, and it doesn't bother me anymore. And that's the way most of our patients are. Most of them who have had it for 10 or 12 or 20 years, they say, I don't even think about it. But it's when it first starts, it's like, oh my goodness, what's wrong with me? Is there something terrible going on? I got to get rid of this sound.
Very good. We're going to take another quick break. Sandra, thank you for your call. It was a great question. We'd love to have more of your questions. Go ahead and give us a call during the break, and we'll get those lined up. 615-737+ is the number to call. Stay with us.